My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 30 when my aunt's solicitor telephoned to say Aunt June had died. My parents had known since breakfast. By lunchtime, they had already entered her house, photographed every room, and placed colored stickers on the furniture they intended to claim. Nobody had thought to call me. That evening, I stood outside June's blue cottage in Ashford Bay, Maine, staring at a brass key taped beneath the porch lamp. On the envelope behind it, she had written 3 words in her crooked handwriting. For Claire. Always. 12 years earlier, my parents had taken away my key to their house. Now the woman who rescued me had left one where everyone could see it. At the funeral, my mother sat beside me as though we had shared every Christmas and birthday during those missing years. She pressed a tissue beneath one dry eye and whispered, "Afterward, we'll discuss how to divide June's property sensibly." She believed my aunt's death had opened a door for her. What she did not know was that June had spent 11 years building a lock my mother could not pick, and hidden in the final section of her trust was a condition that would turn my parents' own accusation against them. To understand why, you need to know what growing up in the Bennett house was like. My mother, Elaine, managed accounts for a chain of dental clinics. She did not believe in gifts. She believed in investments, repayments, and proof of gratitude. When I was 15, she began recording the cost of raising me in a red notebook. School shoes, electricity, orthodontic appointments, even the extra fuel used when Dad drove me to debate practice. Whenever I disagreed with her, she opened the notebook and reminded me how expensive my existence had been. My father, Martin, disliked conflict more than he loved justice. He would stare into his coffee and say, "Your mother only wants you to appreciate things." That sentence was his shelter. He lived inside it, while she made every decision. Aunt June was Dad's older sister, and the opposite of both of them. She had run a marine repair shop near the harbor for 35 years. Her hands were scarred. Her language was occasionally unsuitable for church, and her kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and engine oil. When I tried to pay her back for a winter coat at 16, she pushed the money into my pocket. "Care is not a loan," she said. "If somebody gives it to you with an invoice attached, it wasn't care." I carried that sentence home like a stolen match. The family rupture began during my senior year. June fell from a ladder at the boatyard and fractured her hip. The surgery went well, but she needed months of rehabilitation. While she was still in the hospital, my mother arrived with brochures for assisted living facilities and evaluation of June's waterfront cottage. June rejected the idea immediately. She was 59, mentally sharp, and furious that anyone had measured her windows while she was learning to walk again. My mother called her stubborn. Then she began telling relatives that June was confused, unsafe, and vulnerable to outsiders. Those outsiders were June's mechanic, her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, and me. One night, I heard my parents discussing an emergency guardianship petition. Mother planned to control June's bank accounts, sell the cottage, and use the proceeds to pay for a private facility. What remained, she said, would stay protected inside the family. The next afternoon, I warned June. She did not cry or panic. She called a lawyer named Miriam Shaw, requested a medical evaluation, and organized her records in 3 labeled boxes. When the court investigator interviewed me, I told the truth. June managed payroll from her rehabilitation bed, remembered every employee's hours, paid her bills, and understood exactly what my parents wanted. Her physician confirmed it. The guardianship petition failed. Outside the courthouse, my mother took my elbow and spoke quietly enough that nobody else could hear. "You chose her over us," she said. "Choice have costs." I was 17 and still believed parents said cruel things when frightened, then regretted them later, 6 weeks after my 18th birthday. I returned from an evening shift at a grocery store and found my clothes inside black trash bags beside the garage. My key no longer fit the lock. Mother opened the door but left the security chain fastened. "You testified against your own family," she said. "Adults pay for their decisions." I saw Dad in the hallway behind her. He held my red winter scarf, the one June had bought me, but he did not approach the door. "Dad?" I asked. He lowered his eyes. Mother placed an envelope through the narrow opening. Inside was a copy of her red notebook. At the bottom, beneath years of expenses, she had written balance due. Loyalty, then she closed the door. I dragged the bags nearly 2 miles through freezing rain. When I reached June's cottage, the porch was dark. I knocked once. The lamp came on before the door opened. June took in my wet hair, the garbage bags, and the envelope shaking in my hand. She did not ask what I had done. She stepped aside and said, "You're late, soup's getting cold." The next morning, she gave me a brass key on a blue cord. "This is yours," she said. "It doesn't expire when we disagree." For the next 12 years, that key remained in my wallet. Life after being disowned was not a triumphant montage. It was exhausting. I worked early shifts at a bakery, attended community college, and slept in June's spare room until I could rent a studio above a laundromat. I studied accounting because numbers, unlike people, were supposed to balance honestly. At 20, after months of working and studying without rest, I suffered a severe panic attack during an exam. I could not breathe, could not feel my fingers, and became convinced I was dying. I spent 4 days in a behavioral health clinic. I told June I had been hospitalized for dehydration. Shame made the lie easier than trust. I recovered, finished my degree, and became a forensic bookkeeper for small businesses. My work involved finding missing money, reconstructing damaged records, and explaining how harmless-looking transactions formed deliberate patterns. I became very good at reading what people tried to hide between numbers. June rebuilt her strength and returned to the boatyard. Eventually, she sold the repair operation but kept the land, leasing the workshops to 3 marine businesses. She never discussed its value. Our Sundays stayed simple: chowder, card games, and walks along the harbor while she criticized expensive yachts. She never demanded that I forgive my parents. She never prevented me from calling them either. For years, I sent birthday messages that received no reply. At Christmas, I mailed cards to the house where my key no longer worked. Finally, when I was 26, I stopped. June said only, "A closed door is still closed even when you keep decorating it." 4 years later, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The disease moved quickly, but June did not. She planned everything: home care, medication, funeral music, even which neighbor would inherit her snowblower. A registered nurse named Leah Morrison managed her hospice treatment. I handled groceries, laundry, and whatever repair June pretended she could still do herself. I never touched her medical records or controlled her medication. During her final months, Miriam Shaw visited the cottage several times. June always closed the study door. When I asked what they were arranging, she said, "Just making sure nobody confuses grief with ownership." 2 weeks before she died, she asked me to bring the brass key from my wallet. She held it in her palm and smiled. When people arrive carrying sympathy in one hand and a measuring tape in the other, let Miriam speak before you answer. I promised. June died before dawn on a Monday in April. My parents learned from the hospice service at 7. At 8:15, a neighbor saw them enter the cottage. At 9, my mother texted a local antiques dealer. At 11, she called a property agent. At 4 that afternoon, Miriam finally reached me at work. When I arrived, small stickers marked June's dining table, her cedar chest, 2 paintings, and the grandfather clock. My mother had written M on some and E on others. Assigning possessions before June had even been taken from the house, Mrs. Alvarez stood on the neighboring porch with her arms folded. "I photographed everything," she told me. June said I should, if they came early. At the funeral 3 days later, Mother wore pearl earrings and the expression she used at charity dinners. Dad greeted mourners at the chapel entrance as if he were the chief grieving relative. Neither apologized for failing to inform me. After the service, Mother linked her arm through mine. June was emotional near the end, she murmured. Whatever documents she signed, we shouldn't let them divide us. We have been divided for 12 years. Her smile tightened. Money can make people remember things dramatically. I said nothing because I had made a promise. The trust meeting took place the following Thursday in Miriam's office overlooking the harbor. June's estate included her cottage, valued at $620,000, the leased boatyard property, worth $1. $4 million. Investments of approximately $980,000, and savings and personal property totaling another $140,000. Just over $3 million. Miriam read the main distribution slowly. The entire estate passed to me. My father received June's restored 1967 pickup truck, provided he accepted it without contest. My mother received the red notebook she had given me 12 years earlier, which June had preserved in a locked document box. Mother's face did not move. Then Miriam read June's note. Martin gets the last machine we repaired together. Elaine gets the account she kept. Claire gets everything I built because she understood that a home is not an asset before it is a refuge. Dad stared at the table. Mother placed one hand over mine. You cannot possibly manage all this alone, she said sweetly. Fortunately, we can help. I withdrew my hand. No. For a fraction of a second, her face emptied. Then she smiled at Miriam, collected her bag, and left. Her first attack looked like reconciliation. She invited me to dinner at my childhood home. She said there would be no business discussion, only a chance to begin again. I knew the invitation had a price, yet some part of me still wanted to sit at that table and hear my father ask about my life. The first hour was almost convincing. Dad remembered the name of my firm. Mother served lemon chicken, my childhood favorite. They laughed about an old vacation. I began to imagine that grief had broken something open. Then Mother cleared the plates and produced a navy binder titled Bennett Family Asset Preservation Strategy. The plan transferred the cottage, boatyard, and investments into a company controlled by my parents. I would receive a quarterly allowance and require their approval for withdrawals above $5,000. The last page granted Mother authority to sell property for the benefit of the family. A yellow arrow pointed toward my signature line. You spend your days chasing receipts, she said. Let us carry this burden. Dad examined his fork. I closed the binder. Thank you for dinner. I am not signing. Mother's voice became flat. We offered you the peaceful option. 3 weeks later, I was served at my office. My parents petitioned to invalidate June's trust, alleging incapacity and undue influence. Their filing described me as a financially sophisticated niece who had isolated a dying woman and manipulated her estate. It omitted the decade during which June had created and repeatedly reviewed the trust while healthy. Then the complaint reached my employer. An anonymous source accused me of accessing a client's confidential accounts and diverting funds. The details were false, but specific enough to trigger an investigation. Because my job required absolute financial trust, the firm suspended me without pay. Miriam immediately saw the design. The probate case made me look greedy. The professional complaint removed my income. Together, they created pressure to settle. During discovery, my parents' lawyer, Charles Rook, requested my complete medical history. He claimed my 4-day hospitalization proved emotional instability and suggested June could have been manipulated by my dependency. Only my parents could have told him about it. My mother's clinic network had processed an old insurance statement mailed to their house, and she had kept it for 10 years. Rook questioned me for 6 hours. He repeated the words psychiatric admission until they sounded like a criminal charge. He asked whether June knew. I admitted she did not. He smiled, because secrecy looked like dishonesty when arranged correctly. Afterward, I became ill in the courthouse restroom. That night, Dad appeared at June's cottage alone. He looked smaller than I remembered. He carried the truck key June had left him, but kept turning it through his fingers. Your mother grew up with nothing, he said. Her father gambled away their rent. She believes controlling money keeps people safe. She is trying to destroy my career. She thinks you'll agree before it goes that far. And what do you think? He looked toward the dark study. Give her part of it. Then everyone can move on. There it was, not regret, not courage, only another request that I pay for his peace. You watched her put me outside, I said. Now you are watching again. He left the truck key on the porch rail and walked away. 3 days later, Mother sent a handwritten letter. She offered to withdraw both complaints if I transferred 30% of the estate into the family company. She promised birthdays, Christmases, Sunday dinners, and a complete restoration of our relationship. For several hours, I wanted to accept. That is the humiliating truth. I was not tempted by the money I would keep. I was tempted by the mother in the letter, the one who missed me, saved my room, and wanted me home. I read those pages until the words blurred. Then I noticed that every promise was conditional. Love would resume after payment. Home would reopen after signature. The red notebook had never been destroyed. She had simply added a larger final entry. I wrote one sentence beneath her offer. A relationship purchased under threat is not reconciliation. The formal settlement arrived the next week. I would surrender $900,000. In exchange, the trust challenge would disappear, the professional complaint would be clarified, and my medical records would remain private. Miriam told me settlement was rational. Even after paying, I would retain substantial assets. Trial would expose my hospitalization publicly, and no lawyer could promise how a judge would interpret family testimony. I placed the agreement on June's dining table and uncapped a pen. Before I signed, Mrs. Alvarez knocked. Behind her stood Leah, June's hospice nurse, carrying a cardboard file box. They had not coordinated their arrival. Each had come because June had asked them to if my parents contested the trust. The box contained copies of every capacity assessment, legal invoice, dated letter, and visitor log connected to June's planning. On top was a sealed video drive. Mrs. Alvarez rested her hand beside the agreement. June told me fear makes expensive bargains look cheap. Leah opened the visitor log. It showed that my parents had visited June only twice during her illness, both times after asking Mrs. Alvarez about property values. It also showed that I was absent from every legal meeting between June and Miriam. For 12 years, I had believed silence protected me. In that moment, I understood it protected them. My parents could weaponize my hospitalization only while I treated survival as shame. I tore the settlement in half. The next morning, I authorized the release of my clinic records. Not merely the pages Rook wanted, the entire file, including the doctor's conclusion that I had suffered an acute stress reaction, sought help voluntarily, followed treatment, and recovered without impairment. Then Miriam submitted June's evidence box and requested sanctions for coercive settlement tactics. My secret stopped being leveraged the moment I told it first. The hearing began in October. Rook presented my mother as a concerned sister-in-law and me as an expert manipulator. Mother testified that June became suspicious and irrational after cancer. She claimed I controlled access to the cottage and turned June against her only brother. Dad confirmed portions of her story without looking at me. My cousin Sophie testified that I had always been intense and had spent increasing time with June. Both statements were true. Arranged beside allegations of fraud, they sounded sinister. On the second morning, I took the stand. I described the guardianship petition, my testimony at 17, and the night my parents discarded my belongings. Miriam introduced the red notebook. Mother objected, but the judge admitted it because June had specifically referenced it in the trust. I read the final entry aloud: balance due, loyalty. Then I discussed the clinic. At 20, I became overwhelmed and asked professionals for help. I said, I was frightened and ashamed. But receiving treatment did not make me dishonest, dependent, or incapable. It kept me alive long enough to build a career based on examining evidence. Miriam entered the full medical file. Rook's promised revelation became an ordinary record of a young woman who had survived abandonment. Next came June's timeline. She created her first trust 11 years before her diagnosis. She reviewed it 4 times. On each occasion, an independent physician confirmed capacity. I had not attended a single appointment. Leah testified that she alone controlled medication and clinical decisions. She produced logs proving I was listed only as family. Mrs. Alvarez showed her photographs of my parents labeling furniture hours after June's death. The antiques dealer confirmed Mother contacted him before anyone contacted me. Finally, Miriam played June's video. June appeared at her study desk 9 months before her diagnosis. She looked healthy, annoyed, and unmistakably herself. "If this recording is being watched in court," she said, "Elaine has repeated the mistake she made years ago. She will say Claire influenced me. Claire does not know this recording exists. She does not know the figures in my trust. I left her my property because, when she had nothing, she never once treated me as something to be taken." June lifted the red notebook into view. "Elaine believes family creates a debt. I believe family cancels one. That is the difference this trust records." Rook argued that a prepared video proved suspicion, not capacity. The judge asked him whether he had any medical evidence that June lacked capacity. He did not. Then Mother stood without permission. "We fed Claire for 18 years, she snapped. "We clothed her. We educated her. She betrayed us, and June rewarded it. How can anyone call that fair?" The courtroom became perfectly still. The judge asked, "Mrs. Bennett, are you saying your daughter owed you financial loyalty because you raised her?" Mother realized too late what she had admitted. "I am saying actions have costs." "Yes," the judge replied, "they often do." The ruling came after lunch. The court upheld the trust, finding overwhelming evidence of June's capacity and no evidence of undue influence. More importantly, the judge found my parents had brought the case in bad faith. Under June's no contest clause, Dad forfeited the restored truck. The court also ordered my parents to pay a substantial portion of the trust's legal expenses. The truck was not sold. I donated it to the vocational school where June had once taught evening classes. Outside the courtroom, Mother approached me one last time. "After everything we spent on you," she said, "this is how you repay us." For 12 years I had imagined 100 speeches for that moment. None were necessary. "The account is closed," I said. I walked away before she could enter another charge. Victory did not feel joyful. It felt quiet. The local newspaper printed my hospitalization because it was part of the public record. Some clients stared too long when I returned to work. My privacy did not magically come back. But the professional investigation closed after evidence linked the complaint to claims from my parents' legal filing, and my firm reinstated me with back pay. 6 months later, I moved into June's cottage. I kept the blue paint, the scarred dining table, and the porch lamp. The boatyard rent now funds the Open Door Grant, which provides emergency housing and counseling for young adults rejected by their families. The application has one page. Nobody must prove perfect behavior. Nobody signs a repayment agreement. The first grant went to a young man sleeping in his car behind the fish market while caring for his sick brother. The second paid a security deposit for 2 sisters escaping a house where every meal was used as evidence of what they owed. I reviewed their applications with the habits of a forensic bookkeeper, but June's voice kept correcting me. The purpose was not to decide who deserved mercy. The purpose was to make mercy available before desperation became permanent. So we removed the questions about family conflict, stopped requesting letters from parents, and asked only what would make the next 30 days safer. Each approval felt like turning the porch lamp on for someone I might never meet. The fund could not repair every broken home, and I never pretended it could. It could buy a motel room, a bus ticket, a counseling session, or enough time to breathe. Sometimes a small opening is all a trapped person needs. June had understood that when she opened her door without demanding my explanation first. I wanted her money to remember the lesson even after the rest of us were gone. Dad wrote once. His envelope contained a check equal to every expense Mother had listed for me after I turned 15. On a card he wrote, "I should have opened the door. I deposited the money into the grant." I did not call him. Forgiveness, I learned, does not always require renewed access. The following winter, Mrs. Alvarez brought a 19-year-old apprentice named Maya to my porch. Maya's parents had thrown her out after she refused to abandon welding school for the office job they chose. She carried a backpack and 2 grocery bags. I showed her the spare room. When she asked about rent, I told her she could help shovel snow and make coffee. What if we argue? She asked. I took June's brass key from its blue cord and placed it in her hand. Then we argue, I said. The key still works. Tonight, the harbor is hidden by fog. Maya is studying marine electrical diagrams at June's table, and the old porch lamp is glowing through the mist. Beneath it hangs a small wooden box filled with spare keys for people supported by the grant. My mother taught me that love was an account and every kindness created a balance. June taught me something harder and better. Real care leaves people freer than it found them. For years, I believed the most important key was the one my parents took away. I was wrong. It was the one June placed in my hand the next morning. The key that did not depend on obedience, gratitude, silence, or money. Some families keep records of what you cost them. Others keep a place for you to return to. And if anyone has ever placed a price on your belonging, remember this. You are allowed to leave the account unpaid. You are allowed to build a different home. You are allowed to give someone else a key that still works after disagreement. That is how a family debt finally ends. Not when it is repaid, but when someone refuses to collect it from the next person.